Hey guys, so today we're doing our third example of graphing sine and cosine with transformations. In this one I really threw everything at you. Everything that could be changed is changed. So this one's a real challenge. If you can graph this one, you're set for your test. So now let's just write out the general form of sine. We're going to have y equals a sine of bx minus c plus d. And let's just do a quick refresher on what each one is. That's amplitude. Then we've got b helps you figure out the period because the period is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. Then we've got c here, which helps us with the phase shift. And the phase shift is c divided by b. I just had a voice crack. And d is just the vertical shift. So how far up and down should it go? So now let's figure out just all of these factors: amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift of this function. So immediately amplitude, that's a good way to start. It's not too hard. Amplitude is 1/2. So that means instead of going up all the way to from 1 to -1, we would just go from 1/2 to -1/2. That does not account for the vertical shift, which will change that. And then now we need to think of, okay, the next thing is our period. Period is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. Well, what's our b? Well, we need to factor back into that 3. So we need to distribute that 3 around to both of those terms. And let's rewrite the inside of our function. We have sine. Then we're going to have 3x plus 3 pi over 12. We can simplify that to sine 3x plus pi over 4. So 2 pi over b, our b value is whatever's in front of that x. One moment. Yeah, b value is whatever's in front of the x, which in this case is 3. So we've got period of 2 pi divided by 3. Alright, so now we have a phase shift next. That is defined as c over b. Now we have it in the term we want, in the form we want, I should say. So we've got pi over 4. And it's actually going to be a negative pi over 4, and that is because the formula calls for bx minus c. So what we really have is 3x minus negative pi over 4. Then that's what turns it into 3x plus pi over 4. So it's negative pi over 4 divided by our b value, which is 3. And that gives us negative pi over 12. So that's our phase shift. Then we have vertical shift, vs of 2 up, or up 2, whatever one you want to say. So this is a crazy one. We got all kinds of stuff going on here. Okay, so let's first start with our amplitude. We started at -1 to 1. We have to multiply this by our amplitude of 1/2. So that's going to give us, we're going to go from -1/2 to 1/2. But then, well, we moved everything up 2, so we need to add 2 to both factors of this. So we're going to go from 1/2 all the way up to 2.5, so 2.5. And we can pencil that into our graph. We'll start 1.5, go all the way up to 2.5. Okay, so now we've got some nasty fractions for our period and our phase shift. We know our phase shift is negative pi over 12, so I can write that in here. Negative pi over 12. That's where my graph is going to start. And now a period is 2 pi over 3. So what I would try to do is let's try to get this to where it has a denominator of 12 so we can work with what we already have. So 2 pi over 3, we have to multiply it by 4 to get denominator of 12 times 4 over 4. And that's going to give us a period. Let me rewrite it down here. Period of 8 pi over 12. So that means one period is going to go from negative pi over 12 all the way up. We're going to add that 8 pi over 12 because that's the length of one period. And that's going to give us 7 pi over 12. And let's try to go one in the negative direction. This time we're going to subtract 8 pi over 12. It's going to be negative 9 pi over 12. Okay, so if our period 8 pi over 12, we need to figure out where the critical point's going to be. And you know that there's going to be to find where the critical points are going to be, we take our period length and divide it by 4. So we can do 8 pi over 12 divided by 4. Well, that's going to give us, it'd probably be easier to do 2 pi over 3 divided by 4, which is 2 pi over 12, which is pi over 6. Or we could rewrite that as 2 pi over 12. That's going to be all of our important points. So we're going to have pi over 12 to negative pi over 12 all the way to pi 12. Then we're going to add another 2 pi, which is 3 pi over 12. Add another 2 pi, 5 pi over 12. And those are going to be our critical points going for this period. Then we can figure them out for this period. Negative 3 pi over 12. Subtract 2 more, we're going to get negative 5 pi over 12. Subtract 2 more, we're going to get negative 7 pi over 12. So now we have everything labeled. We've got our where the values are going to be up here. We've got everything on the bottom. Now we literally just have to graph. So now it's the easy part. So next I would figure out the midline. The midline is going to be right in between the highest point and the lowest point. So 1.5 and 2.5. What's in between that? 2. So we can draw a little midline here. That is a terrible line, but you get the point. And we know since we did a phase shift, negative pi over 12, we're going to start here at negative pi over 12 right in the middle because it is a sine function. It always starts in the middle. Hasn't been turned upside down, so we're going to start by going up. And we know our next critical point is at pi over 12, so it's going to be right about there. Our next critical point is at 3 pi over 12. It's going to be back at the midline. 5 pi over 12, we're going to be at at 1.5. Normally it would be negative 1. And then 7 pi over 12, back at the midline. So this is our first period of this graph. We draw it like this. And then we're going to do the same thing here. Start by going down. Negative 3 pi over 12, 1.5. Then we're going to go back up to that midline. All the way back up to 2.5. All the way back down. So it's going to go like this. Right there. It's going to continue forever. This one's going to continue forever too. So there we have our graph. And now we can check through. Make sure we can did all of those things. Is the amplitude 1/2? Does it go 1/2 up here, 1/2 down here? Check. It does. Period. Is the period 2 pi over 3 units, which we figured out was 8 pi over 12? Is the period 8 pi over 12? Well, we went from negative pi over 12 to 7 pi over 12. Looks like 8 pi over 12 to me, so that's a check. Phase shift. Did we move to the left pi over 12 units? Well, our midline starts at negative pi over 12, so it looks like we did. That's a check. Vertical shift, did we move up 2? Well, we went from pi 1/2 and negative 1/2 all the way up to 2.5 and 1.5. Looks like we did that. So we did all those things. We literally changed everything we could here. If you can do this one, you can do any of them. Thanks for watching. I hope this was able to